Hey friend, welcome to my channel. I'm Erin. If we haven't met yet, I am a military spouse and teacher turned photographer, and I love helping fellow Milspouse photographers build businesses that thrive despite frequent moves. I am here today with another video in our series interviewing fellow members of Photographers Changing Stations, and I'm super excited to dive into this conversation with Jen Jordan. Jen, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to chat with you.
Awesome. Well, let's start with your just like traditional mill spouse info. You like bump into someone at a spouse's event and you're like, hey, this is who I am, where I'm from, what I do. Give us all those details.
So my military spouse journey is a little bit different than most people. So my husband's actually been out since 2019. Um, he is still a civilian contractor with the Navy, so we are still very, very involved in military life.
Yes.
But I actually started my business I started taking photos of people's military events in 2017, 2018 because I was the person with the nice camera. And my
Yep.
husband was deployed. He did 3 deployments in 4.5 years. So he was gone literally all the
Wow.
time.
Yeah.
Um, and I would just want to hang out with my friends and take photos. So my first two homecomings were friends who asked me to come with them just for moral support. And I brought my nice camera
Oh.
and took photos that way. And I really loved it. When he got out in 2019, I decided that I really loved homecomings, having been on both sides, having been the spouse that welcomes their partner home from a homecoming, or having been the photographer on the other end. I felt
Yeah.
like I offered a really unique perspective, and I really wanted to continue that. So 2021, I really ramped up my business, and the rest is history.
That
So
is
I'm not
amazing.
technically an active duty. I mean, I'm not an active duty spouse anymore, but it's military is still a very, very big part of our life.
Yes. Well, I love that you say that because in our community, most of us are active duty spouses. And I think we all wonder, like, oh, what's life going to be like when, whether that's 5 years or 25 years, like we don't really know what that will look like on the other side, if you will. So can you tell us what that transition was like for your family?
Because he deployed so often, it has been great.
I bet. I bet.
um, yeah, he's an Osprey pilot, so
Okay.
he was on all the time, workups and deaths, and just long deployments that were extended, deployments on ships, deployments on land. It was just so much in such a short period of time that when he got out and he was home all the time, it was very strange. And he got out and we went straight into the pandemic. So we were
Oh,
literally together all of the time for the first time in our relationship, really.
wow.
And I talked to a lot of my homecoming clients about that readjustment period and reintegration and how hard that can be, and how a lot of times you're just looking at the homecoming and you're looking at the beautiful photos and the
Yeah.
excitement, but there's so much more to it. And so that kind of extended reintegration period of when they get out and they're home, and my husband was utilizing the GI Bill. So he was going to school every day and wasn't going to work every day, and he was
Yeah.
home because it was the pandemic. So it was a really big adjustment for our family. But I never once wished that he was active duty again.
You're like, it was a
I
big
can't
adjustment, but I also kind of love it.
Yeah, yeah. And, we made so many wonderful friends while he was active duty. And some of my best friends are other spouses that I met while he was active
Hmm.
duty. And finding that community outside of active duty life can be difficult, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I feel like it's something I've noticed just starting this community of Milspouse photographers is like, we all get it. Like, there's just like this inherent understanding of what goes on that like you just become really fast friends with people. And that's one thing I wonder about after we get out is like what that will look like friendship wise, because your people are then all over the place and you just don't have that same connection.
Yeah.
So,
And I think it's been interesting. I am someone in my business who I want to be friends with everybody. And I give a lot of myself to people because I want to be friends with everybody. And some of my closest friends I've met through my photography business who are also military spouses, because it is a really unique experience that we went through and that we're still going through. And my husband's service will always be with him. And
Sure.
our experiences having gone through so many deployments and so many workups in that kind of beginning period of our relationship, it is so much a part of who we are as a couple and who we are as a family and who he is as a person, that it's really hard to explain to my civilian friends what it was like for him to be gone for the kind of early stages of our relationship. You know, we went on 3 dates and then he was gone for 6 weeks. And then, you know, we had been together for 6 months and then he deployed for 6 months. So it was just a very, not a lot of people understand what that's like.
No,
Except for
not at
military
all. And I was
spouses.
actually going to ask you that. You've already started to answer, like, how did you guys meet and like how did you make that work? Were you married before he deployed for the first time? Where does that all fall?
Yeah, so we met, we're in San Diego,
Okay.
and I moved to San Diego in 2015.
Okay.
So I have always worked full time with my photography business, and I was working in college athletics. I was working at Penn State. I'm originally from New Jersey, so it was a good opportunity for me to get closer to home after I went to grad school in San Jose, California, which is in the Bay Area.
Okay.
Um, and when I got to Penn State, I realized I was always meant for California.
Oh.
And so, so part of that is I didn't want to deal with the weather anymore. Central Pennsylvania is, I'm sure you're very familiar with being
Yes.
in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
It's gross, and I didn't want to deal with it anymore. So a family member out here in San Diego welcomed me to stay with them for basically as long as I needed to kind of get on my feet, figure out what my next move was. I was 25, I was still young. So I moved to San Diego with the thought that I would only be here for a little bit and kind of go somewhere else. To live in San Diego, it's both very hard because it's very expensive here, but it felt like a dream and something that I could never make happen.
Wow.
But my husband and I actually met 6 months after I moved here. We
Okay.
met on good old OkCupid. And and at that point, I was very much, I think, like a lot of us, I was never going to date anyone in the military.
Of course not.
There was
Why would you do
no
that to
way,
yourself?
no way. And I grew up in New Jersey, and in North Jersey, there is no military presence. And I never knew anyone in the military. I went to undergrad in Buffalo, New York. There's no military presence. There was just, it wasn't even something that had crossed my mind. But I met my husband, and it was kind of the rest is history type thing.
Yeah.
We were very fortunate. His whole career was here in San Diego. So he was stationed at Miramar when he first came out here after flight school, and then went back up to Pendleton, which is about 45 minutes north of Miramar.
Okay.
And then came back to Miramar. So our whole career was here. So I was very fortunate that I didn't have to, change the location of my business. I was able to keep my full-time job throughout the entirety of his career.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like we're opposites, and like we have been so fortunate that, knock on wood, we haven't had to go through a deployment yet, but we've also moved too many times.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting how different our experiences can be. Like, as yes, we're all milspouses, but like depending on the career field and things like that, like we all have such different experiences too.
Yeah, and so much of it is, I find it with my clients that my husband's experience at the time was not unique. Osprey pilots were deploying a lot.
Yep.
There was a lot. The world was different. And now I'm finding with my clients, especially my homecoming clients, they're only doing 1-2 deployments in 9 years. And so it's our experience is unique now, but for his peer group, it's not at all.
Yes, so interesting.
Yeah.
Well, can we chat more about homecoming since you brought that up? That's how I actually originally connected with you. A couple years ago, you did a webinar on shoot proof, and I saw like, oh, military homecomings. Like, it was right as I was ramping up and going from part-time to full-time in my business. So I came and just like totally fell in love with your work. It's absolutely beautiful. And just the way that you shared what that all looks like. So tell us, you said you got into homecomings because you'd been on both sides of it, but like, what was your first homecoming like? How did you decide like, this is what I'm going to do?
Yeah. So my first homecoming was, like I said, just for a friend. One of my best friends, her husband and my husband went to school together. And so he was, I think he was in Japan. And she just asked if I wanted to drive up to Pendleton with her and would kind of be there to support her
Yeah.
and take some photos. She had gotten a puppy while he was
Oh.
deployed, and she wanted pictures of him with the puppy. So I went up with her, and I had a Canon Rebel T6i,
Love it.
and I really like the basic, camera. And I went up with her and took photos, and the adrenaline rush was like nothing I had ever experienced.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think my husband had gone on his second deployment. I don't really remember, but it was exhilarating. And she came with me to my husband's second homecoming and took photos. And I
Oh.
loved the photos. I absolutely loved the photos. And from there, just realized that this was something that I wanted to do more of. At the time, I was transitioning jobs, so I didn't
Okay.
know that I could make homecoming photography a business.
Sure.
In my mind, photographers do family sessions and weddings, and like Melissa was talking about, really kind of honing in on specific niches. I didn't know that you could make a business out of doing homecomings.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't try until about 2021, when my husband was kind of getting his first full-time job outside of military. Our life was a little bit more settled, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna shoot my shot.
Yeah.
And I posted in a bunch of the different spouse groups in San Diego. There are so many military spouse groups in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Marine Corps specific ones, there's the officer spouse, there's different bases have their own groups. And I was in all of them because I was in all of the
Yeah.
I was at all of the
Yeah.
bases. And so I posted that for $200, I would do your homecoming and give you a family session. And I got 5 people who were interested.
Okay, great.
Now looking back, I'm like, why?
Like, what did I do to myself?
Why did I do that? But those 5 people basically created the foundation for my business.
Yeah.
And when I look back at those sessions, one of them is one of my closest friends. One of them led me to one of my closest friends. One of them has, if I were to trace all of my clients and see how they found me,
Yeah.
I would say 95% of them were from her. Just that kind of starting point really exploded everything and exploded my business for me. So I wanted to do homecomings. I didn't want to do anything but homecomings.
Yeah.
And so I really heavily focused on that, and just kind of being there for people in their most vulnerable moments, because a homecoming,
they're emotional.
They're very emotional. And I think it's deployments can be really hard and traumatic. And also they can be really boring. My husband's second deployment was to Okinawa, and he would text me and say, oh, we're going on a hike today. We're, doing this, we're doing that. We're going to get ramen. And I'm like,
you want to come home?
Right. But his third deployment was on a ship.
Okay.
And he was flying a lot, and he was, back and forth to different countries, and it ended up getting extended. So he was gone for 8 months. It was so different, and every deployment is different. And so every homecoming is different.
Sure.
And that's what I loved about it, that no two were the same. And it was very, having worked in college sports for a long time, I was very used to adrenaline and high speed and that kind of stuff. And I found that it really suited my my skill set, my personality. It fed back into my full-time job, which I wasn't expecting either. So now that I have a 2.5-year-old, I've kind of shifted my business away from homecomings, just because it's very difficult to do with a 2.5-year-old. But I still love it, and I'm still doing homecomings when I can.
Sure.
I transitioned more into doing ceremonies like changes of command or retirements, promotions, just because those are scheduled.
Absolutely. That was actually one thing my big question around homecoming is how you handle the dates with them changing. I've only ever done one, and it was like, it might be this day, it might be this day, we should know by this day, but then it still could change. Like, how do you juggle doing multiple homecomings when you don't know when people are coming back?
It's a crapshoot a lot of times. And I think I've because my husband has been on so many different types of deployments, each of his 3 deployments were very different. So in the Marine Corps, you can go on a ship, you can do what's called a dirt det, which is basically going to a base in the Middle East or in Djibouti or out that way, and you're kind of staying at the same base for a long time. You could go to Japan. And I've kind of been able to figure out what the deployment will look like based on what the
like sort of where they're going.
Yeah, and not to say that it's a perfect science,
Sure.
but
You've done enough to figure it out.
I think I think at this point I've done 60 homecomings.
Wow.
And I have kind of figured out what that looks like. So for example, my husband's second deployment, or actually this would be a better example. My husband's third deployment was called a MU, a Marine Expeditionary Unit. And so that's when 3 ships go out to sea at the same time. And they're attached to Navy ships. So there's also a Navy component to it, and there's a Marine Corps component to it. So there are websites that I use to try and figure out what ships are in the MU. And when people inquire with me, I always ask what type of deployment it is and what ship are they on, or what base are they attached to. And then I can figure out what type of deployment it is, and I can look and see, okay, well, is it, are they attached to a carrier? If they're attached to a carrier, then that's going to be a little bit different, because carriers, it's just the carrier and then there are 2 supporting boats. If it's a Marine Expeditionary Unit, it's 3 smaller boats. And so I kind of figure it out based on that. If they're pilots, they're coming back earlier than the ship because they have to fly off the ship.
Fair.
But they may not be flying off the ship. They may just be bussing off the ship. So suffice it to say that it's, I typically only take one homecoming per deployment type.
Gotcha.
So I would take one homecoming, one client for a MU, or one homecoming for the carrier. And then once we got a little bit closer, I could add in different folks. I don't know if that makes sense.
It's a lot.
It makes sense in my mind, but it's a lot.
It is. Well, and I would imagine you probably, you've done 60 of them. How long along the way did you sort of figure out this system? I feel like early on it was probably just like, yeah, sure, I'll book you and let's try, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, probably in the last, probably after 2 years.
Okay.
I really figured out what my capability was and how I could best serve people. In the beginning, I was booking less. I was booking fewer people because I was so concerned about that overlap. Very often, homecomings get delayed. And especially if you're coming back to Pendleton, a lot of times they're middle of the night just because of, flying in from different bases or driving from different bases. And then if it's middle of the night and you have another homecoming in the morning.
Sure.
I live 45 minutes from Pendleton. That's pretty hard to do.
Yeah.
And I have had several middle of the night homecomings, and I can kind of figure out which deployments are going to or may come back middle of the night. It's always Pendleton. I think I've only had one middle of the night on Miramar.
How do you photograph that? Like, is it well lit enough that?
No.
Okay.
No, that's how I learned flash photography.
Okay, there you go.
So I have an LED light. So I also, prior to the last few years, I also did video.
Okay.
And I would do video and photos for the homecoming. And so I got an LED light that mounted on top of the camera. And I also created this kind of rig for myself where I attached a GoPro to it. And then I would sometimes have the flash too. If I'm not doing video, then I'm just using my flash.
Okay.
But most of the time, the most recent one I did was most recent middle of the night one. I think it was 2 or 3 in the morning. And we got very, very fortunate that the parking lot we were in on Pendleton was very well lit.
Okay.
And my client is, she's a gem, and purposefully told him to go towards this big street
I
light
love it.
so that I didn't have to use the flash as much. And those photos came out super great.
Oh,
So a
good.
lot of it is, client education
Oh,
and
absolutely. And you show this
fingers
beautiful
crossed.
portfolio of work and they're like, great, we're coming back at 2 a.m. You're like, okay, well, your photos aren't going to look like this.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of it is just letting them know, like, hey, it's,
It kind of is what it is.
it is what it is. And you have to go into so much of homecoming photography is client education
Mm,
and letting them know going into it, hey, your photos are not going to look like this golden hour homecoming that I did on this beautiful parade deck with this beautiful backdrop on Pendleton.
yeah.
They're not,
Yeah.
because we're doing this homecoming in the parking lot of Naval Base San Diego, which has construction everywhere and is not cute. So just fair warning
Yeah.
that, what matters the most is the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And what matters the most is capturing that reunion with you and your partner, or your kids and your partner, and the emotion is what matters
Yeah.
the most, not the backdrop. And
Yeah.
if you want to, guarantee what the backdrop looks like, here's my pricing guide. we can put
Let's do
we
a
can put a
family
family
session.
session. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a lot of, it's taken me a long time to try and figure out, pricing or timing, and
Mm-hmm.
being able to track flights and track ship movement. Um, because in the beginning, it was just a lot of guessing.
Yeah. So, what would you say to somebody who wants to get into homecoming photography? Obviously, we've talked like there's a lot that goes into it, but what would you say are
Yeah.
like the most important things to do to start to set yourself up well?
There are a lot of military spouse photographers here in San Diego,
Mm-hmm.
and I noticed that a lot of them way undercharge. And that is just because there are a lot of photographers willing to do it for cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have to figure out what type of service you want to give to your client. If you just want to take photos of them, that is totally fine. And you can charge whatever you feel comfortable doing based on your cost of doing business, based on your own personal, how you feel about that. That's
Yeah.
totally fine. I, like I said, I am someone who probably gives way too much to people. I'm a hardcore people pleaser. I
That's why we
want
get along so
to,
well, Jen.
right, right. I want to give so much of myself to people. And so in the beginning, when I was charging so little, I noticed that I would spend hours talking to my clients on the phone. I mean, I tell my clients, I am there for you. I am your friend at homecoming, because I know what it's like to be at a homecoming by yourself, and it sucks.
Mm.
And so I will be your friend to help you through that end of the deployment or the deployment. I've had clients book me a year in advance. I
Wow.
will be, I will be whatever you need me to be. And then I started to charge based on that.
Yeah.
Um, and also recognizing that, I just booked a homecoming yesterday, and it's one of my clients who's become a friend, and I charged her less than I normally would have, because I know that she doesn't need that emotional labor from me. She doesn't need as
Sure.
much of that emotional labor from me. And the homecoming type will require less tracking from me. It will
Mm-hmm.
require less physical labor from me, less mental stress from
Sure.
me. So I structure my pricing based on that, based on what is needed of me. Um, but I see people post in spouse groups all the time that they will do homecomings for $50, and I just, you are worth so much more than that.
Yeah.
And I think it's really hard when you are trying to build your portfolio. I mean, I did it. I get it.
Sure.
It's really hard when you're trying to build your portfolio and trying to get those homecomings under your belt, but also recognizing what the service is that you are providing and what you want to provide is really
Mm-hmm.
hard. So my advice is, when photographers ask me for advice on breaking into homecomings, a lot of it is word of mouth. Facebook groups, social media are the number one way that
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get clients.
Mm-hmm.
I very rarely book military sessions that are from SEO or social media. For the most part, I'm booking them because, my friend used you for their homecoming and I love
Yes.
those photos. And a lot of it is just focusing on word of mouth and the client experience. If that's what you
Mm-hmm.
want to do, if you want to, run homecomings like mini sessions where it's just kind of shoot and run, that's totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's kind of working backwards and saying, okay, what do I want this experience to be like from the client side?
I love that. It's honestly, it's kind of like what I talk about when I do partnerships is like you have a
Yeah,
set number of, or relatively set of like the people that you're going to serve for a reduced cost, but then you give them one heck of an experience and you get them talking and spreading the word. And then you can charge what you know you need to charge to go forth from there.
absolutely. So much of any photography business is word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even more so, I think, in military communities because
Yes.
we are all so tight.
Yep.
And there are so few photographers who do homecomings, and not everyone does them. Not everyone does retirements or changes of
Right.
command or homecomings or, is willing to, you know, get up at 3 in the morning to shoot your homecoming. And I think recognizing that people talk is
Mm-hmm.
really important, and you
Yep.
want them to talk well about you and your
Yep.
business.
That's awesome. Well, we could talk homecomings all day, but I want to switch gears because one of the main reasons there was so much interest in doing this series in our community is because while, yes, we are all Milspouses and we are all photographers, we are also all so much more than that. So I would love to take a few minutes to get to know the Jen outside of homecoming photography. You mentioned you have a little one, you're obviously married, but tell us more about you outside of your business.
Yeah. So my husband and I have been married for almost 7 years in May.
Okay.
Um, we have a 2.5-year-old who is wild. He is very he loves to sing. Right now he's really into Bruce Springsteen, which as a Jersey girl
Oh,
really warms my
I'm
heart.
sure it
Um,
does.
yes. But aside from that, like I mentioned, I have always worked full time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my photography business I use as my travel fund, and
Love it.
kind of my ancillary fund. So it paid for my car. It paid for us to go to London a few years ago. It's paying for us to go to London next year.
That's awesome.
So I have been really fortunate that I have had wonderful supervisors and wonderful workplaces that have
Mm.
both nurtured and supported my photography business. I work in education. So my last job, I do marketing and communications. My background is in media relations, PR, all that jazz.
Okay.
So I worked at a school, for an independent school, private school, for almost 7 years. And now I work in higher education, kind of doing a lot of the same thing, media relations. Um, but I'm also taking photos at my job. So
How
my
fun.
last job, it's a lot of fun. My last job, I was the main photographer on campus and I was doing video as well. And this job, yesterday, I was on campus taking photos. So my photography business really informs my full-time job, which I'm
Yeah.
incredibly grateful for. I was doing the social media at my last job for the school, and that helps my social media with my business and vice versa. So working in marketing and PR really kind of informs my photography business and vice versa. So I work in education. I am really big into hot yoga,
Okay. Love
which
it.
is new-ish for me. Yeah, post my pregnancy and postpartum experience was very difficult, and so I'm kind of getting back into the swing of things. And I'm in May training to become a doula.
That's
So,
amazing. Oh my gosh.
yeah,
How do you have
so
time for
I'm
that, Jen?
girl. I we'll see.
We'll see.
So
Okay. Good
I
answer.
the school that I work at has a volunteer doula program attached to the hospital.
Okay.
So I will be doing volunteer doula training and offering volunteer doula services to folks, birthing folks who come into the hospital and request a doula. It's free of charge to them. And
That's
it's a
amazing.
volunteer service, which is really great because since having my son, I've become really passionate about pregnant people and birthing people.
Mm-hmm.
And my experience with my son has been really unique in that he's hard of hearing. So that's having a child who has a difference has been really unique as well, and kind of pushed me into doing more, working with more parents and pregnant people and newborns and more families rather than military homecomings, because that's where my heart is right now, is trying to be the best advocate for my child and advocate for other parents who also went through difficult postpartum periods or difficult pregnancies.
That's amazing. It sounds to me like you got to be your ideal client in the military homecoming sense, and now you're getting to be your ideal client in the family sense, and like how beautiful to be able to pull that all together in your business and in your life.
I'm hoping to. I will always love homecomings. I mean, they bring me so much joy, and the adrenaline is just like nothing else. Mm-hmm. And they gave me my business, which I never thought was possible.
Yeah.
So it's been hard to shift the structure of my business and kind of the heart of my business away from homecomings to now doing this life. And I think when you have a kid, it's your life changes.
It sure does.
Right. And it's,
Yep.
And it's really hard to kind of recognize that in yourself and understand what you need and what your family needs. And so that's kind of where I've been at and where I've kind of come to in the last probably year or so, is that homecomings I can't do them like I used to.
Yeah.
So just trying to shift my business to focus on more what and who I hope to serve has been an interesting challenge.
And fits you well in this season. And that doesn't mean that, when your son is older, that you couldn't go back to it, but it's one of the big perks, I think, of running your own business is getting to control, like, what do I want my life to look like right now, and how can I fit that in, as opposed to just trying to do it all and then you feel miserable because of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, well, I've so enjoyed talking to you, Jen. I have one more question that I want to wrap up with. You have the unique experience in that you never had to experience a military move. So tell me, if you could have lived anywhere for 2 years, where would you have chosen to go?
Okinawa.
Okay.
Far and away. One of my best friends, they PCS there when, they were there for probably 3 years, 2.5 years. And she had an absolutely amazing experience. We actually went out to visit them in Okinawa, and I fell in love with it. Just her girls were able to learn Japanese and go to a Japanese preschool and really be immersed in the culture. And she would go out and stand up paddleboard and kayak and just like bop around and do all these wonderful things. And I 100% Okinawa. And just amazing. The travel from there. That would be where I would go.
Yeah, that would be very cool. Awesome. All right. Well, let's wrap up and have you share where people can connect with you if they have homecoming questions or just want to follow along on your new journey. Let us know where we can find you.
Yeah. So my Instagram is @JenJordanPhotography. Website is www.jenjordanphoto.com.
Love it.
I am always happy to answer any questions about homecomings. I know that they can be really stressful, so I'm happy to help in any way I can. But yeah, that's where you can
amazing.
Find me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen. This has been great. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
So wonderful to always talk with you, Erin.
Thanks.
Bye.